The sound of rifles cocking echoed through the canyon as Catherine Reid stepped forward with her hands raised, her heart hammering against her ribs, while 5 outlaws kept their weapons trained on the weathered barn where 12 terrified townspeople were being held hostage in the sweltering New Mexico heat of August 1878. Catherine had arrived in Silver Springs 3 months earlier from Boston, a 24-year-old woman with auburn hair and green eyes that had seen too much sorrow after losing her parents to fever. She had come west to start fresh, to teach at the small schoolhouse, to build a life where the weight of grief might finally lift from her shoulders. The town had welcomed her with open arms. The children adored her, and the community had given her purpose again. Now those same people who had shown her kindness were trapped inside that barn, and she was the only person standing between them and certain death. The leader of the outlaws, a man named Garrett Lynch, sat atop his black stallion with a bandana covering the lower half of his face. His eyes were cold and calculating as he watched Catherine approach. Behind him, his men shifted nervously, their fingers hovering near triggers. They had robbed the bank that morning, killed the sheriff in the process, and taken hostages when the townspeople had tried to fight back. Now they were demanding fresh horses, supplies, and safe passage out of town, or they would start executing people one by one. "That is close enough," Garrett called out, his voice rough as gravel. Catherine stopped 20 feet from the outlaws, her pale blue dress already dusty from the dry earth. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept them visible, kept her chin raised. "I am here to talk about releasing the hostages," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You have made your point. The town knows you are serious, but killing innocent people will only bring more law down on you than you can imagine." Garrett laughed, a sound without humor. "You think we are afraid of the law, school teacher? We have been running from the law for 5 years. What is a few more murders to men like us?" "Then why have you not killed them already?" Catherine asked, taking a calculated risk. "If you truly did not care, they would already be dead. You want something. Let us negotiate." From his position on the ridge above the barn, Nathaniel Cole watched the scene unfold through the scope of his rifle. He was a tall man of 26 with sun-bronzed skin, dark hair that touched his collar, and blue eyes that had seen their share of violence. He worked as a ranch hand on the Triple Creek Ranch just outside town, but he had once been a Texas Ranger before a corrupt captain had driven him out of the service for refusing to look the other way on a bribery scheme. Now he lived a quieter life, but the instincts of a lawman never truly left. He had been in town buying supplies when the robbery happened, had seen the sheriff go down, had watched the outlaws take hostages and barricade themselves with their captives. The deputy had been out of town, and by the time word could be sent to the nearest marshal, it would be too late. Nathaniel had grabbed his rifle and circled around to get a vantage point, hoping for a clear shot, but the outlaws had positioned themselves too well. Then he had seen Catherine walk out of the general store and head straight toward the barn, and his blood had run cold. He knew Catherine Reid, though they had never spoken more than polite greetings. She came into town every Saturday for supplies, always had a kind word for everyone, always stopped to admire the horses at the hitching posts. Nathaniel had noticed her the first week she arrived, noticed the sadness that lingered behind her smiles, noticed the way sunlight caught in her hair. He had wanted to speak with her properly, to perhaps invite her to the church social or the harvest dance, but he had always talked himself out of it. What did he have to offer a refined Eastern woman? He was just a cowboy with a tarnished past and calloused hands. Now he watched her stand before armed killers, and something fierce and protective surged through his chest. The woman had courage that put most men to shame. She stood there in the brutal afternoon sun without flinching, negotiating for lives as if she had been born to it. "What I want," Garrett was saying, "is what I already demanded. Horses, supplies, and freedom to ride out of here. Your town took too long deciding, so now the price has gone up. We want $2,000 in addition to everything else." "The bank does not have $2,000 left," Catherine said. "You already took most of what was there, but I can get you more supplies, better quality than what you asked for. Medical supplies, ammunition, food that will last you weeks instead of days." Things that will be more valuable to you than money you cannot spend while you are running. Nathaniel saw Garrett lean forward in his saddle, interested despite himself. The school teacher was smart, appealing to practicality rather than morality. These men did not care about right and wrong, but they cared about survival. "And how do I know you will not fill those supplies with tricks?" Garrett asked. "Poison the food? Sabotage the ammunition?" "Because you will inspect everything before you release the hostages," Catherine said. "You hold all the power here. I am simply trying to save lives, including yours. Every minute you stay here, you risk more lawmen arriving. Let me get you what you need. Verify it is good, and you can ride away. Everyone lives, including you and your men." One of the other outlaws, a younger man with a scar across his cheek, spoke up. "She has a point, Garrett. We have been here too long already. Take what we can get and move." Garrett silenced him with a sharp look, but Nathaniel could see the wheels turning in the outlaw's mind. Catherine had planted a seed of doubt, made him reconsider the timeline. It was masterful, really. She was not pleading or begging. She was presenting logic, treating him like a reasonable businessman rather than a criminal. It gave him a way to back down without losing face. "You have 1 hour," Garrett finally said. "Bring everything to that point there." He indicated a spot 30 feet from the barn entrance. "My man will inspect it. If everything is as you say, we take half the hostages with us for the first mile, then release them. The other half stays in the barn until we are clear, then we let them go." "No," Catherine said firmly, and Nathaniel's breath caught. "You do not take anyone with you. You inspect the supplies, you take them, and you release everyone before you leave. I will come with you as your hostage for the first 5 miles. 1 person is easier to manage than 6, and I give you my word I will not try to escape or cause trouble." "Catherine, no!" a voice called from inside the barn. It sounded like Thomas Wright, the blacksmith. Other voices joined in protest, but Catherine did not turn around. Nathaniel's hands tightened on his rifle. This woman was offering herself up to save others, putting her own life at greater risk. His mind raced through scenarios, calculating angles and possibilities. He could potentially take out 2 of the outlaws before they reacted, but the other 3 would have time to shoot either Catherine or the hostages in the barn. The risk was too great. Garrett studied Catherine for a long moment. "You are either very brave or very foolish, schoolteacher." "Perhaps both," Catherine said. "Do we have an agreement?" "Why would you do this?" Garrett asked, genuine curiosity in his voice now. "These people are not your family. You have only been here a few months. Why risk your life?" Catherine was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the dusty space with quiet intensity. "Because I have lost everyone I loved to circumstances beyond my control. I will not stand by and watch more good people die when I might be able to prevent it. These people gave me a home when I had nothing. The least I can do is fight for them." Something shifted in the air. Even the outlaws seemed moved by her words, by the raw honesty in them. Nathaniel felt his heart constrict. He understood that kind of loss, that desperate need to protect what little good remained in the world. 1 hour, Garrett said. "You come back with the supplies and yourself, we have a deal. But if I see any tricks, any sign of a trap, I start shooting hostages. Understood?" "Understood," Catherine said. She turned and walked back toward town, her spine straight, her pace measured. She did not run, did not show fear, even though Nathaniel could see the slight tremor in her shoulders that betrayed her true state. As soon as she was out of the immediate danger zone, Nathaniel carefully backed away from his position and made his way down the ridge through a path that would keep him hidden from the outlaws. He intercepted Catherine at the edge of town, where several townspeople had gathered, keeping out of the outlaws' line of sight. The moment Catherine reached them, several women rushed forward to embrace her, and men began talking over each other about forming an armed group to rush the barn. "No," Catherine said firmly. "We do this my way. We give them what they want, and we get our people back safely." "You cannot go with them," Martha Brennan, the doctor's wife, said with tears streaming down her face. Her husband was one of the hostages. "They will kill you the moment they are clear." "They might," Catherine agreed quietly, "but it is a better chance than any alternative I can see." There is another alternative, Nathaniel said, stepping forward. Every eye turned to him, including Catherine's green ones, which met his for a long, startling moment. Up close, he could see flecks of gold in her irises, could see the fear she was hiding so well. I tracked them from the ridge. When you go with them, I will follow at a distance. They will not know I am there. If they try anything, I will make sure you have a chance to escape. You will be 1 man against 5, Catherine said. I have been worse odds, Nathaniel replied. It was not entirely true, but she did not need to know that. And I am a very good shot. But we need to plan this carefully. Catherine searched his face, and he met her gaze steadily. He saw the moment she made her decision, saw her shoulders relax slightly as she nodded. All right, help me gather what they need. The next hour was a flurry of activity. Catherine moved through the town with purpose, collecting supplies from the general store, the doctor's office, the hotel kitchen. She chose items carefully, nothing that could backfire, but ensuring everything was of good quality as promised. She packed dried beef, hardtack, coffee, beans, medical supplies including bandages and laudanum, ammunition that fit the weapons she had seen the outlaws carrying, and even a bottle of decent whiskey. Nathaniel worked alongside her, and as they packed the supplies into saddlebags and crates, they talked in low voices. When they take me, they will likely head northwest toward the canyon passes, Catherine said, her hand steady as she wrapped packages. That is the fastest route to lose any pursuit. That is what I am counting on, Nathaniel said. There are places along that route where I can position myself, places with cover where I can keep eyes on you without being seen. If they release you as promised, I will make sure you get back safely. If they do not, he paused, his jaw tightening. I will not let them hurt you. Catherine looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them. I do not even know your name, she said softly. Nathaniel Cole, he said. I work at the Triple Creek Ranch. I've seen you in town. Catherine Reid, she said, even though he already knew. Thank you for doing this. You do not have to. Yes, I do, Nathaniel said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. He could not explain the fierce protectiveness he felt, the way his entire world had narrowed to keeping this brave, selfless woman safe. I will not let you face this alone. Their hands brushed as they both reached for the same bag, and the contact sent a jolt through Nathaniel. Catherine's breath caught slightly and color rose in her cheeks before she looked away. Even in the midst of crisis, even with death potentially waiting, there was something undeniable sparking between them. We need to go, Catherine said, her voice slightly breathless. Time is almost up. Nathaniel helped her load everything onto a small wagon. As she prepared to drive it back to the barn, he caught her hand gently. Listen to me carefully, he said. When you are with them, do not resist or fight unless absolutely necessary. Keep yourself small, non-threatening, but stay aware of your surroundings, note any opportunities. If shooting starts, drop flat and stay down. I will handle the rest. You sound like you have done this before, Catherine said. I was a Texas Ranger once, Nathaniel admitted. Before I came here, I know how men like this think. Understanding dawned in Catherine's eyes. That is why you're so calm. Calm is not quite the word, Nathaniel said with a slight smile. But I know how to manage fear. You do too, I have seen it. You are remarkable, Catherine Reid. She blushed deeper at that, and despite everything, she smiled. Let us hope I remain remarkable enough to survive this. Nathaniel wanted to say more, wanted to tell her that she had to survive because he had just found her, and he could not bear the thought of losing her before he even had a chance to know her properly. But there was no time, so he simply squeezed her hand once and then released it. Catherine drove the wagon back toward the barn with Nathaniel walking alongside her until they got close. Then he peeled off to circle back to where he had left his horse. He would need to move fast to get into position along the northwest route. As Catherine approached the barn alone with the wagon, Garrett and 2 of his men came forward to inspect the supplies while the other 2 kept weapons trained on her in the barn. They went through everything methodically, testing the food, examining the ammunition, checking for any signs of tampering. Catherine stood patiently, her hands clasped in front of her, waiting. After 15 tense minutes, Garrett nodded. "It is good," he said. "Better than I expected. You kept your word, schoolteacher." "Now you keep yours," Catherine said. "Release the hostages." Garrett gestured to one of his men, who went to the barn and opened the door. Slowly, the 12 hostages emerged, blinking in the bright sunlight. They were disheveled and frightened, but appeared unharmed. Martha Brennan ran forward as soon as her husband appeared, embracing him fiercely. Others stumbled toward town, supported by friends and family who had been waiting. "Everyone out," Garrett confirmed, watching. "Now you come here." Catherine walked forward, and one of the outlaws roughly grabbed her arm, pulling her toward a spare horse they had brought. "You know how to ride?" he asked. "Yes," Catherine said. She had learned as a child, though it had been years. They boosted her onto the horse, and she settled into the saddle as gracefully as she could manage. Her hands were tied loosely to the saddle horn, enough to keep her from escaping, but not so tight she would fall if the horse bolted. "Let us move," Garrett said. The outlaws quickly loaded the wagon's contents onto their pack horses, working with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, they were mounted and ready to ride. Garrett looked at Catherine. "You give us any trouble, schoolteacher, and you will regret it." "I gave you my word," Catherine said quietly. "I intend to keep it." They rode out at a steady pace, heading exactly where Catherine had predicted, northwest toward the canyon passes. Catherine focused on staying balanced, on breathing evenly, on not showing the terror that threatened to overwhelm her. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and dust rose from the horse's hooves, coating her throat and making her eyes water. What she did not see was Nathaniel, already positioned a quarter-mile ahead on a rocky outcrop, watching their approach through a pair of field glasses. He had ridden hard and fast, knowing the terrain well enough to take shortcuts. As the group passed below his position, he mounted his horse, a steady roan gelding named Copper, and began to follow at a careful distance, using the landscape to stay hidden. The outlaws rode for 3 miles, keeping a steady pace but not pushing the horses too hard in the heat. Catherine remained quiet, observing everything she could. She noticed that the young man with the scar kept glancing back nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Another outlaw, older with graying hair, seemed tired, sick perhaps, slumping in his saddle. Garrett was the clear leader, but there were fractures in the group, tension she might be able to exploit if necessary. As they reached the 5-mile mark, where Catherine had negotiated she would be released, Garrett held up his hand and the group stopped. They were in a narrow passage between 2 rock walls, a place where sound would echo and trap potential pursuers. It was a smart location, defensible. "Well, schoolteacher," Garrett said, turning his horse to face her, "you kept your word, and so did we. We got our supplies, and nobody died. That is more than I can say for most jobs." "Then let me go," Catherine said, her heart pounding. This was the moment of truth. Garrett studied her for a long moment, and Catherine felt her breath freeze in her lungs. Then he nodded to one of his men, who came forward and cut the ropes binding her hands to the saddle. "You walk back from here," he said. "Do not follow us. Do not try to be a hero. Just go home and forget you saw us." Relief flooded through Catherine so strongly she almost felt dizzy. "Thank you," she said, meaning it. "Thank yourself," Garrett said. "You were smart today, braver than most men I have known. You would have made a decent outlaw if life had taken you different directions." There was almost respect in his voice. Catherine slid down from the horse, her legs shaky after the tense ride. The outlaws began to move past her, heading deeper into the canyon. She stepped back against the rock wall, making herself small as they had discussed. She watched them go, hardly daring to believe she was actually going to survive this. Then the older outlaw suddenly swayed in his saddle and collapsed, falling hard to the ground. His horse spooked, and in the confusion, several things happened at once. The young outlaw with the scar wheeled his horse around in panic, his weapon swinging wild. Garrett shouted orders, trying to regain control. And in the chaos, the young outlaw's gun discharged, the bullet striking rock near Catherine's head, sending shards of stone flying. Catherine cried out and ducked, instinct taking over. The young outlaw, realizing what he had done, looked horrified. "I am sorry, I did not mean—" But Garrett had drawn his weapon, his face dark with anger and suspicion. "You tried to shoot her after we made a deal? What are you doing, you fool?" "It was an accident," the young man protested. "He is right, it was an accident," Catherine said quickly, stepping forward with her hands raised, trying to de-escalate. "Please, he is just frightened. We are all on edge. Your man needs help. He is not well." But Garrett was not listening. The fragile trust of their negotiation had shattered. He turned his weapon toward Catherine, and she saw in his eyes that he had made a terrible calculation. She was a witness, and now things had gone wrong, and he could not afford to leave her alive. Time seemed to slow. Catherine saw Garrett's finger tighten on the trigger. She began to move, to dive, but she knew she would not be fast enough. And then a rifle shot cracked through the canyon, echoing off the walls like thunder. Garrett jerked in his saddle and the weapon flew from his hand. Another shot followed immediately, taking out the gun of the outlaw beside him. The horses screamed and reared. Catherine threw herself against the rock wall, making herself as small as possible as chaos erupted. "Drop your weapons!" Nathaniel's voice rang out from somewhere above them, amplified by the canyon walls, making it sound like he had an entire army with him. "You are surrounded. Drop your weapons and you live. Fight and you die right here." For a moment, Catherine thought they might fight, but then the young outlaw threw down his weapon, his hands shaking. "I am done! I am not dying for this!" The older outlaw on the ground was unconscious, clearly in no shape to fight. That left only two others besides Garrett, and they looked at their wounded leader, looked at the invisible threat in the rocks, and made their choice. Weapons clattered to the ground. "Smart men," Nathaniel said, emerging from behind a boulder above them, his rifle trained on the group. He looked larger than life, commanding and dangerous, and Catherine felt something flutter in her chest that was not fear. "Now all of you, hands where I can see them." "Catherine, are you hurt?" "I am all right," Catherine called back, though her voice shook slightly. She was scraped from rock shards, but otherwise unharmed. Nathaniel made his way down to their level with careful, practiced movements, never taking his aim off the outlaws. When he reached Catherine, he allowed himself one quick glance at her, his eyes scanning for injuries, and she saw the fierce relief there before his expression hardened again. "Tie them," he said to Catherine, tossing her a coil of rope he had on his belt. "Start with him." He indicated the young one, who looked ready to cry. "Then the others." Catherine's hands trembled as she tied the outlaw's hands, but she did it, drawing on reserves of strength she did not know she possessed. Nathaniel kept his rifle steady, professional. When she reached Garrett, whose shoulder was bleeding from where Nathaniel's bullet had struck, the outlaw leader looked at her with something like bitter amusement. "Should have known," he muttered. "Too good to be true. You planned this." "No," Catherine said honestly as she tied his wrists. "I had hoped you would keep your word. You nearly did. I am sorry about your man." She gestured to the older outlaw who still lay unconscious. "He has been sick for weeks," Garrett said, his voice weary now. "Should have left him behind, but he rode with me for 15 years, could not do it." There was something almost human in his voice, and Catherine felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. These were hard men who had made terrible choices, but they were still human, still capable of loyalty and regret. The world was not as simple as she had once believed back in Boston. Once all the outlaws were secured, Nathaniel finally lowered his rifle. He turned to Catherine, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, the adrenaline of the situation still coursing through them both. Then Catherine took 2 steps forward and did something that surprised them both. She walked straight into his arms. Nathaniel caught her against his chest, one arm wrapping around her while the other still held his rifle, and Catherine buried her face against his shirt. She was shaking now, the fear and stress finally releasing now that the danger had passed. She felt his heart pounding against her cheek, felt his breath in her hair, and for the first time in months, since before her parents died, she felt safe. "You are all right," Nathaniel murmured against her hair. "I have got you. You are safe." They stood like that for a long moment, and when Catherine finally pulled back, there were tears on her cheeks that she had not realized she was crying. Nathaniel reached up with gentle fingers and brushed them away, his touch tender in a way that made her heart ache. "You saved my life," she said softly. "You saved 12 lives," Nathaniel replied. "I just made sure you lived to tell about it. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen, Catherine. You were incredible." Catherine felt heat rise in her face, but it was different from her earlier blushes. This was warmth, pleasure at his words, at the open admiration in his eyes. "I was terrified," she admitted. "Courage is not the absence of fear," Nathaniel said. "It is acting despite it. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met." They were standing very close now, close enough that Catherine could see the darker blue ring around his irises, could see the shadow of stubble on his jaw, could smell leather and sun and something uniquely him. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then Garrett groaned, shifting where he sat tied up, and the spell broke. Nathaniel stepped back, clearing his throat. "We should get these men back to town. The older one needs a doctor, and the others need to face justice." "What about the sheriff?" Catherine asked. "They said they killed him." "They did," Nathaniel confirmed grimly. "Shot him in the back when he tried to stop them. Tom Harrison was a good man. He deserves justice, and these men will face it." They gathered the outlaws and began the trek back to Silver Springs, Nathaniel leading the group on horseback while Catherine rode beside him. The outlaws were tied in a line, walking behind the horses except for the older one, whom they had loaded onto his horse and tied into the saddle to keep him from falling. It was slow going in the fading afternoon light, but steady. As they rode, Catherine and Nathaniel talked in low voices, sharing the details of what had happened from their different perspectives. Catherine learned that Nathaniel had been positioned at 3 different points along the route, moving ahead each time to stay in position. He had seen the old outlaw fall, had seen the weapon discharge, had made the split-second decision to reveal himself and take control of the situation. "If you had waited another second, I would be dead," Catherine said quietly. "I did not wait," Nathaniel said, his voice hard. "I could not. The moment I saw him aim at you, nothing else mattered." Something in his voice made Catherine's breath catch. She looked at him, saw the tension in his jaw, the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, and felt that flutter again in her chest. This man who barely knew her had put himself at risk to save her life, and the way he was looking at her now suggested his motivations went deeper than simple heroics. "Why did you do it?" she asked softly. "Risk yourself for me?" Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, then he met her eyes. "Because I have watched you every Saturday for 3 months, hoping to work up the nerve to speak to you properly. Because you smile at everyone like they matter, and you stop to pet every dog and horse you pass, and you have sadness in your eyes that I recognize because I carry it too. Because when I saw you walk toward those outlaws today, I realized that a world without Catherine Reid in it would be a darker place, and I could not let that happen." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different. These came from a place of unexpected joy, of connection, of possibilities she had thought died with her old life. "I noticed you too," she admitted. "Every Saturday. You wear a blue shirt most times, and you always tie your horse at the far end of the post, and you carry yourself like you're expecting trouble even when there is none." "Old habits from my ranger days," Nathaniel said, but he was smiling now, a real smile that transformed his serious face into something warmer. "I wanted to talk to you," Catherine continued, but I thought, what would a cowboy want with a school teacher from Boston? What could we possibly have in common?" "Everything that matters," Nathaniel said softly. "Courage, loyalty, the desire to protect what is good in this world. That is what I saw in you today, Catherine. That is what I want to know more about." They were riding close enough that their legs occasionally brushed, and each contact sent sparks through Catherine. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. And despite the traumatic day, despite the outlaws they were escorting and the tragedy that had befallen the town, Catherine felt something light and hopeful unfurling in her chest. By the time they reached Silver Springs, full darkness had fallen, and the town was lit with torches and lanterns. A crowd gathered as soon as they spotted the group approaching, and a cheer went up when they saw Catherine and Nathaniel with the captured outlaws. People rushed forward, asking questions, offering help. Martha Brennan, whose husband had been one of the hostages, pushed through the crowd and embraced Catherine fiercely. "You wonderful, crazy, brave girl," she said through tears. "You saved them all. You saved my Henry." Other townspeople echoed the sentiment surrounding Catherine with gratitude and affection. Catherine felt overwhelmed by it all, and instinctively she looked for Nathaniel. He was there, standing just behind her, a steady presence in the chaos. When their eyes met, he gave her a small nod, and somehow that anchored her. The deputy, who had returned to town to find chaos, took charge of the outlaws, locking them in the small jail and sending for the doctor to tend to the wounded one in Garrett's shoulder. Nathaniel gave a full statement about what had happened, his ranger training showing in the precise, detailed account. Catherine added her own testimony describing the negotiation and the events in the canyon. "You both did this town a great service," the deputy said. He was a young man, barely out of his teens, clearly overwhelmed by suddenly being the highest law in town. "I will make sure the marshal knows what happened here. These men will hang for killing Sheriff Harrison, you can be certain of that." As the official business concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Catherine suddenly felt exhausted down to her bones. The adrenaline that had sustained her throughout the ordeal was fading, leaving her shaky and drained. She swayed slightly, and immediately Nathaniel was there, his hand on her elbow. "You need rest," he said gently. "Let me walk you home." Catherine nodded gratefully, not trusting herself to speak. Nathaniel guided her through the streets to the small house behind the schoolhouse that served as her residence. It was a modest place, just a few rooms, but it was hers, and she had made it cozy with curtains she had sewn herself and books on every surface. At her door, Nathaniel paused. "Will you be all right alone tonight?" he asked. That was a significant ordeal. Sometimes the fear catches up after everything is over. "I will be fine, Emma," Catherine said, though she was not entirely sure it was true. "Thank you, Nathaniel, for everything." Nathaniel reached out and took her hand, holding it gently. "Catherine, I would like to see you again. Not because of what happened today, but because I meant what I said earlier. I want to know you. I want to spend time with you. Would you allow me to call on you properly?" Catherine felt warmth bloom in her chest, chasing away some of the exhaustion. "I would like that very much," she said softly. "Perhaps you could come for dinner tomorrow evening. I'm not much of a cook by Boston standards, but I have learned to make a decent stew." "That sounds perfect," Nathaniel said, smiling. He squeezed her hand gently, then released it. "Get some rest. I will see you tomorrow." He waited until she was inside with the door closed before he walked away, and Catherine leaned against the door, her hand pressed to her racing heart. Despite everything that had happened, despite the fear and danger and death, she felt more alive than she had in years. That night, Catherine did indeed struggle with nightmares, waking several times with her heart pounding and the echo of gunshots in her ears. But each time she remembered Nathaniel's arms around her, his steady presence, his promise to see her again, and she was able to calm herself and return to sleep. The next day the town was buzzing with talk of what had happened. Catherine went to the schoolhouse to check on things and found flowers on her desk from various families, along with notes of gratitude. The children whose parents had been hostages drew her pictures, and she had to blink back tears more than once as she looked at them. She spent the afternoon preparing for Nathaniel's visit, cleaning her small house and cooking a stew with vegetables from her garden and beef from the butcher. She changed her dress 3 times before settling on a simple green one that Martha had said brought out her eyes. She felt nervous in a way she had not felt since she was a young girl, excited and anxious all at once. Nathaniel arrived exactly at 6, cleaned up from his ranch work, his dark hair still damp from washing. He wore a clean white shirt and dark trousers, and he brought wildflowers that he had clearly picked himself. "I know they are not fancy like what you probably had in Boston," he said, slightly sheepish, "but they made me think of you, beautiful and resilient." Catherine took the flowers with a genuine smile. "They are perfect," she said. "Better than any hothouse roses. These grow wild and free, surviving in harsh conditions and still managing to bloom. I think that is more meaningful than something cultivated in safety." Over dinner, they talked like old friends, the conversation flowing naturally. Nathaniel told her about growing up in Texas, about joining the Rangers young because he believed in justice, about the disillusionment when he discovered corruption within the ranks. He spoke of leaving the Rangers and drifting for a while before finding work at the Triple Creek Ranch, about learning to find peace in the simple work of caring for cattle and horses. Catherine shared her own story, the pain of losing both parents within weeks of each other to fever, the suffocating grief of the Boston house that held too many memories. She spoke of seeing an advertisement for a school teacher needed in New Mexico territory and making the impulsive decision to apply, to flee everything familiar in search of something new. "I thought I was running away," Catherine said softly as they finished their meal, "but now I think maybe I was running toward something. Toward this place, these people. Toward a life where I could be useful and needed again." "Toward me?" Nathaniel asked quietly, his blue eyes intense on hers. Catherine felt her breath catch. "Perhaps," she admitted. "I did not know it then, but yes, perhaps toward you." Nathaniel reached across the small table and took her hand. "I am glad you came here, Catherine. Not just because of what you did yesterday, though that was extraordinary. I'm glad because you are here, because I have the chance to know you, because when I look at you I see someone I could—" He paused, then continued more carefully. "Someone I want to spend time with. A lot of time." "I want that too," Catherine said, her thumb brushing across his knuckles. His hands were calloused from work, strong and capable. The hands of a man who knew how to protect and provide. "I have not felt this way since before my parents died. I thought maybe I never would again. But then yesterday, even in the middle of everything, I felt it. When you held me in the canyon, I felt alive again." They moved from the table to the small sitting area, sitting close together on the settee. Nathaniel kept hold of her hand, and they talked for hours as the evening grew late. They shared more stories, learned each other's favorite things, discovered shared values and dreams. Catherine learned that Nathaniel wanted to own his own ranch someday, a place where he could raise horses and maybe a family. Nathaniel learned that Catherine loved to read, that she dreamed of starting a library in Silver Springs, that she missed the ocean sometimes but loved the vast openness of the western sky. As the night grew late, Nathaniel reluctantly stood to leave, knowing it would be improper to stay longer without a chaperone. At the door, he turned to Catherine, still holding her hand. "May I see you again soon? Perhaps I could take you riding on Sunday after church? I would like to show you some of the beautiful places around here." "I would love that," Catherine said. Nathaniel lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, his eyes never leaving hers. The gesture was old-fashioned, courtly, and it made Catherine's heart flutter. "Good night, Catherine. Thank you for this evening." "Good night, Nathaniel," she whispered. After he left, Catherine touched her fingers to where his lips had been and smiled to herself in the darkness. Over the following weeks, Nathaniel and Catherine saw each other as often as propriety and their responsibilities allowed. True to his word, Nathaniel took her riding that Sunday, and Catherine fell in love with the landscape all over again, seeing it through his eyes. He showed her hidden valleys where wildflowers grew in profusion, streams where deer came to drink, rock formations that looked like castles against the sky. He was patient with her riding, which was rusty from years of disuse, and praised her as she regained her confidence in the saddle. They attended church together, sitting side by side in the pews, and the whole town noticed. There were knowing smiles and approving nods, especially from the older women who loved a good romance. Martha Brennan declared herself a matchmaker and took credit for bringing them together, even though Catherine pointed out she had done no such thing. "If I had not been so grateful to you for saving Henry, I would not have encouraged him to pursue you," Martha insisted. "Therefore, I am responsible." Catherine and Nathaniel just laughed and let her claim the credit. Nathaniel began coming to town more than just Saturdays, finding excuses to stop by the schoolhouse. He would bring Catherine small gifts, a book he thought she would like, a particularly beautiful stone he had found, a sketch he had done of a hawk he had seen. Catherine discovered that Nathaniel had a talent for drawing, something he was almost shy about sharing. "I learned when I was a ranger," he explained. "Sometimes we needed to sketch suspects or crime scenes. I found I enjoyed it, the act of capturing something on paper. It quiets my mind." Catherine treasured every sketch he gave her, pinning them to her walls. He drew the schoolhouse, the mountains at sunset, the children playing during recess, and one day he shyly presented her with a sketch of herself, drawn from memory. She was looking off to the side, a slight smile on her face, and there was something in the portrait that took her breath away. He had captured not just her features, but something essential about her, a quality of quiet strength and gentle hope. "This is how you see me?" she asked softly. "This is who you are," Nathaniel replied. In turn, Catherine shared her love of literature with Nathaniel. She learned that he could read, but had little practice with it, having left school young to help support his family. So in the evenings, she would read to him everything from Shakespeare to Dickens to local newspapers. Nathaniel would listen with complete attention, asking thoughtful questions, engaging with the ideas. Catherine found she loved sharing this part of herself, loved seeing his mind work through complex concepts. They grew closer with each passing day, learning each other's habits and preferences, comfortable silences developing between them. Nathaniel learned that Catherine hummed while she worked, that she was most thoughtful in the early morning, that she had a wicked sense of humor that came out when she was relaxed. Catherine learned that Nathaniel was an early riser who greeted the dawn, that he was meticulous about caring for his horse and gear, that underneath his serious demeanor was a playful side that emerged when he felt safe. About a month after the hostage incident, the marshal arrived in Silver Springs to transport the Outlaws to trial in Santa Fe. The older outlaw had survived his illness, though he remained weak. Garrett Lynch's shoulder had healed enough for travel. The young one with the scar, whose name was Billy, had spent his time in jail reading a Bible someone had given him and claiming he wanted to change his life. The marshal asked Catherine and Nathaniel to give their testimony before he left, wanting their statements on record. As they recounted the events in the marshal's presence, with the whole town listening, Catherine was struck by how much had changed in just a few weeks. The terrified woman who had negotiated with killers felt like a different person now. She was still that woman, but she was also more. She had found love, found purpose renewed, found a future she had not imagined was possible. After the marshal left with his prisoners, the town held a memorial service for Sheriff Tom Harrison. He was buried in the town cemetery with full honors, and the deputy, whose name was James Collins, was officially appointed the new sheriff. He was young but had proven himself capable, and with Nathaniel quietly advising him, he began to grow into the role. That evening, Nathaniel asked Catherine to take a walk with him. They strolled through the town as the sun set, past the schoolhouse and the church, out to the edge of town where the desert opened up before them. The sky was painted in brilliant oranges and purples, and the air was finely cooling from the day's heat. "I have been thinking," Nathaniel said as they walked, his hand holding hers, "about the future, about what I want from life. I have been saving money from my work at the ranch, putting aside almost everything I earn. I have enough now to start looking for land, to maybe start that horse ranch I told you about." Catherine's heart began to beat faster. She could sense something important coming. "The thing is," Nathaniel continued, stopping and turning to face her, "I realize that none of it means anything if I do not have someone to share it with. Not just someone, but you specifically. Catherine, I know we have only been courting for a few weeks, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I love your courage, your kindness, your strength. I love how you see the good in people, how you fight for what is right, how you make me want to be a better man. I love your laugh and your mind and the way you look at the world. Catherine felt tears gathering in her eyes, happy tears this time. Nathaniel, let me finish, he said gently, smiling. I do not have much to offer you right now. I am just a ranch hand with some savings and a lot of dreams, but I swear to you I will work every day to build something worthy of you, to give you the life you deserve. I will protect you, cherish you, stand beside you through whatever comes, if you will have me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It was simple, a silver band with a small turquoise stone, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. This belonged to my mother, he said. It is the only thing of value I own. I would be honored if you would wear it, if you would agree to be my wife. Catherine was crying openly now, but she was smiling too, so brightly she felt her face might split from it. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, Nathaniel, of course, yes, I love you too. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you emerge from those rocks in the canyon like some kind of avenging angel. Or maybe before that, on all those Saturdays when we were too shy to speak. But I know I love you now, and I want to build that future with you. I want to help you create that ranch. I want to fill it with horses and books and children and love. I want everything with you. Nathaniel's face transformed with joy, and he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. Soft and gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. It was Catherine's first real kiss, and it was everything she had dreamed it would be, tender and passionate and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. I will make you happy, he promised. Every single day I will work to make you happy. You already do, Catherine whispered back. They announced their engagement the next day, and the town erupted in celebration. Everyone claimed they had seen it coming, that it was obvious from the start that Catherine and Nathaniel were meant for each other. Martha Brennan immediately began planning the wedding, declaring it would be the social event of the year for Silver Springs. Over the next few months, Catherine and Nathaniel made plans for their future. Nathaniel found a piece of land about 5 miles from town. 200 acres with good grazing, a stream, and a small existing cabin that could be expanded. He bought it with his savings and began working on weekends to improve the property, building a larger house and fencing for horses. Catherine continued teaching, but she and Nathaniel spent every spare moment together. He taught her more about horses, about the land, about surviving in the harsh environment. She taught him more about literature and culture, about expressing emotions, about allowing himself to dream beyond simple survival. They were married in December of 1878, on a clear, cold day when the sky was impossibly blue. Catherine wore a dress that Martha and the other town women had helped her make white with lace at the collar and cuffs. Nathaniel wore a new suit, dark and well-fitted, and when Catherine walked down the aisle of the small church and saw him waiting for her, she thought her heart might burst from happiness. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to love and honor each other, to face whatever challenges came as partners, to build a life based on mutual respect and affection. When Nathaniel kissed his bride, the entire congregation erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held at the hotel, with music and dancing and more food than Catherine had seen since leaving Boston. People came from ranches and towns all around wanting to celebrate the couple who had saved the town and then found love in the aftermath of tragedy. They danced until Catherine's feet hurt and laughed until her sides ached. And through it all, Nathaniel never left her side, his eyes constantly finding hers across the room, his hand always reaching for hers. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave for the ranch that was now their home, Catherine pulled Martha aside. "Thank you," she said, hugging her friend. "For everything. For welcoming me when I came here alone and grieving. For supporting me through the hostage situation, for being such a good friend." Martha hugged her back fiercely. "You have been a blessing to this town, Catherine Cole. Now you go be happy with that handsome husband of yours and do not be a stranger, you hear me? I expect regular visits." "I promise," Catherine said, laughing. Nathaniel had borrowed a wagon for the occasion, and he helped Catherine up onto the seat before climbing up beside her. As they drove away from town, people threw rice and called out blessings, and Catherine waved until they were out of sight. The ride to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts, hands clasped between them. When they finally arrived, Nathaniel stopped the wagon and turned to Catherine. "Are you ready to see your new home, Mrs. Cole?" Catherine loved the sound of her new name. "I am ready for everything," she said. Nathaniel climbed down and then reached up to help Catherine. But instead of just steadying her as she descended, he swept her up into his arms, carrying her toward the house. Catherine laughed and wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling like a character in one of the romantic novels she loved. "Welcome home," Nathaniel said as he carried her over the threshold. The house was modest but sturdy, and Catherine could see all the work Nathaniel had put into it. There were 2 main rooms currently, one serving as a combined kitchen and living area, the other as a bedroom. The walls were thick adobe that would keep them cool in summer and warm in winter. The floors were wood, carefully fitted. There were windows with real glass, a luxury in this part of the territory. And everywhere she looked, Catherine could see small touches that Nathaniel had added with her in mind. A shelf already built for her books, hooks by the door at a height she could reach for her coat, a small table positioned near the window where morning light would be perfect for reading. "Nathaniel, it is beautiful," Catherine said softly, turning in a circle to take it all in. "You have created something wonderful here." "We have only started," Nathaniel said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "This is just the beginning. I plan to add on more rooms, to build a proper barn for the horses, to plant trees that will give shade, but we will do it all together." Catherine turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. "Together," she agreed. "I like the sound of that." They spent their first night as husband and wife in quiet joy, learning each other in new ways, making whispered promises in the darkness. Catherine had been nervous, innocent as she was, but Nathaniel was gentle and patient, and by the time the sun rose the next morning, Catherine felt transformed, bound to him in ways that went beyond words or vows. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Catherine continued teaching during the week, riding into town each morning and returning in the evening. Nathaniel worked the ranch, starting to acquire horses that he could train and sell. They quickly fell into comfortable rhythms, working side by side on weekends to improve their property, cooking together, reading together in the evenings. The first year of their marriage brought challenges and triumphs in equal measure. There was a drought that summer that tested Nathaniel's water management skills, a rattlesnake that Catherine killed with a hoe when she found it near the chicken coop they had built, a stallion that Nathaniel managed to break after weeks of patient work. Through it all, they faced everything as a team, their love growing deeper with each shared experience. Catherine discovered that she had a knack for managing the business side of the ranch, keeping careful records of expenses and profits, negotiating with buyers in town. Nathaniel discovered that he loved teaching Catherine about horses, watching her grow from nervous around the large animals to confident and capable. By the end of their first year, they had 6 horses in addition to their personal mounts, and interest from buyers as far away as Santa Fe. That winter, Catherine missed her monthly courses and realized with joy and trepidation that she was pregnant. She told Nathaniel one evening as they sat by the fire, and he had pulled her into his arms and held her for a long time, his face buried in her hair. "Are you happy?" Catherine asked softly, suddenly nervous. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Nathaniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have given me everything, Catherine. A home, a purpose, love beyond what I dreamed possible, and now this. We are going to have a family." Catherine felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I am scared," she admitted. "My mother died giving birth to my stillborn brother when I was young. I remember how awful it was." Nathaniel pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "I will not let anything happen to you," he said fiercely. "We will get the best care possible. Martha's husband is a good doctor, and there are midwives in town with decades of experience. You will be fine, and our child will be fine because I refuse to accept any other outcome." His certainty helped ease Catherine's fears, and over the following months she bloomed with pregnancy. She taught school until her 7th month, when moving around became too difficult, and then she focused on preparing the house for the baby. Nathaniel built a beautiful cradle from oak, carving it with intricate designs of horses and flowers. The women of Silver Springs organized a quilting bee and created a stunning baby quilt in blues and greens. Martha came out to the ranch regularly, checking on Catherine's health and bringing supplies and gossip from town. In late July of 1880, Catherine went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day, and there were moments when Nathaniel, pacing outside the bedroom while Martha and the midwife attended to his wife, feared he would lose her. He prayed more in those hours than he had in his entire life, making bargains with God, promising anything if Catherine would just survive. Finally, as the sun began to set on the second day, he heard the thin, warbling cry of a baby, and then Martha was opening the door, her face exhausted but smiling. "You have a son," she said, "and Catherine is tired but well. Come meet your family." Nathaniel entered the bedroom on shaky legs and found Catherine propped up against pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle, and as Nathaniel approached, she pulled back the blanket to reveal a perfect little face, red and squished, with a fuzz of dark hair. "Meet your son," Catherine said softly. "Meet Samuel Nathaniel Cole." Nathaniel sank onto the bed beside them, afraid to touch anything for fear of breaking it. The baby was so small, so impossibly fragile. "Samuel," he whispered, "after my father." "I thought it fitting," Catherine said. "Your father would be proud of the man you have become, of the life you have built." Carefully, reverently, Nathaniel reached out and let his son grip his finger with a tiny, perfect hand. The baby's eyes opened briefly, unfocused and dark, and Nathaniel felt something crack open in his chest, a love so profound and terrifying he could barely breathe around it. "I will protect you both," he promised, "always, no matter what comes." Samuel grew into a healthy, happy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. Catherine proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving, and Nathaniel was a devoted father, often found with his son strapped to his chest as he worked around the ranch. They made adjustments to their lives, Catherine stepping back from teaching for a while to focus on Samuel, Nathaniel hiring a young man from town to help with the heavier ranch work so he could spend more time with his family. The town of Silver Springs continued to grow and prosper. New families moved in, businesses opened, and Catherine's dream of a library came to fruition when the town agreed to fund a small building dedicated to books. Catherine donated many of her own volumes to start the collection and helped organize it, even with a toddler on her hip. The outlaws who had taken the hostages that fateful day in 1878 were hanged for the murder of Sheriff Harrison. Catherine heard the news without satisfaction, only a quiet sadness for the waste of lives. Nathaniel understood. He had seen enough death as a ranger to share her feelings. They agreed that justice had been served, and that was all that mattered. By 1882, their ranch was thriving. They now had 20 horses, a small herd of cattle, chickens, and even a milk cow. They had expanded the house, adding 2 more rooms and a proper parlor. The property had matured, trees growing tall, gardens producing bountifully, and Catherine was pregnant again, this time with less fear and more excitement. Their daughter, Rose Elizabeth Cole, was born in December of 1882 during a gentle snowfall. She was smaller than Samuel had been, more delicate, with Catherine's auburn hair and Nathaniel's blue eyes. Samuel, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from changing her to feeding her. As Catherine recovered from the birth, lying in bed with Rose nursing contentedly, Samuel cuddled against her other side, and Nathaniel sitting on the edge of the bed watching his family with undisguised love, she felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "What is it?" Nathaniel asked, reaching out to brush away her tears. "Are you in pain?" "No," Catherine said, smiling through her tears. "I am just happy. So happy I can barely contain it. 4 years ago, I was alone and grieving, convinced I would never feel joy again, and now look at us. Look at what we have built." Nathaniel leaned forward and kissed her forehead. "We built it together," he said, "and we are not done yet. We have so much more ahead of us." He was right. The years that followed brought more growth, more challenges, more joy. They had another son, James, in 1885, completing their family of 5. The ranch became known throughout the territory for quality horses, and buyers came from as far as Texas and California to purchase Nathaniel's carefully trained mounts. Catherine returned to teaching part-time once the children were older, finding joy in shaping young minds while still having time for her own family. Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved reading as much as his mother. Rose was spirited and adventurous, more at home in the barn with the horses than in the house. James was the youngest, charming and mischievous, able to talk his way out of any trouble. Catherine and Nathaniel watched their children grow with pride and occasional terror at how fast time moved. The town of Silver Springs continued to evolve. By 1890, it had a telegraph office, a proper hotel, 3 churches, and even a small theater. Catherine's library had expanded twice, and she served on the town council, one of the first women to do so. Nathaniel trained the occasional deputy when Sheriff Collins needed help, sharing his ranger knowledge while remaining firmly committed to his ranch and family. On their 10th wedding anniversary in December of 1888, Nathaniel surprised Catherine with a trip to Santa Fe. They left the children with Martha and her husband, now dear friends who were like grandparents to the Cole children, and spent 3 days in the territorial capital, staying in a fine hotel, eating in restaurants, attending the theater. It was the first time they had been alone together since before Samuel was born, and they fell in love all over again, remembering the early days of their courtship while celebrating how far they had come. One evening in Santa Fe, as they walked along the plaza with the lights of the city glowing around them, Catherine stopped and turned to Nathaniel. "Do you remember that day?" she asked. "You with the Outlaws?" "I remember every detail," Nathaniel said. "I remember thinking I could not let you face that alone, even though I barely knew you. I remember being terrified I would be too late, and then furious when that weapon went off. I remember holding you after, feeling you shake, and knowing in that moment that I wanted to hold you for the rest of my life." "I fell in love with you that day," Catherine said softly. "I did not realize it then, but looking back, I know it is true. You were my protector, my partner, my future, all wrapped up in one brave, honorable man. Everything good in my life now stems from that moment, from your courage in revealing yourself and taking control, from your willingness to risk yourself for someone who was essentially a stranger." "You were never a stranger," Nathaniel said, pulling her close. "Maybe in this lifetime we had just met, but it felt like I had known you forever. Like I had been waiting for you forever. I love you, Catherine, more today than yesterday, more tomorrow than today." Catherine kissed him there in the plaza, not caring who saw, and felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt the first time he held her hand. Proof that some feelings never fade, only deepen with time. The years rolled on, bringing the family into a new century. The children grew into young adults, each pursuing their own dreams. Samuel went east to university, studying literature and law, with plans to return and practice in New Mexico. Rose, true to her nature, stayed close to home, taking over more and more of the ranch operations and proving herself a better horsewoman than even her father. James decided to join the cavalry, following in the tradition of his father's ranger days, but in a new era. Catherine and Nathaniel, now in their 40s, found themselves with more time alone again as their children pursued their paths. They took long rides together like they had in the early days of their courtship, explored parts of the territory they had never seen, traveled occasionally to cities like Denver and San Francisco. But they always returned to their ranch, to Silver Springs, to the life they had built together. In 1898, on the 20th anniversary of that fateful day when Catherine had negotiated with Outlaws and Nathaniel had watched her courage shine, they returned to the canyon where he had saved her life. They rode out together on a spring day, the desert blooming with wildflowers after good winter rains. When they reached the spot where it had all happened, they dismounted and stood looking around. "It looks different," Catherine said. "Smaller somehow." "We were different people then," Nathaniel replied. "Young, unsure, still finding our way. Of course it looks different through older, wiser eyes." They walked to where Catherine had stood when Garrett Lynch had aimed his weapon at her, to where Nathaniel had taken his shot from above. The passage of 20 years had softened some details, but the bones of the place remained the same. "I never thanked you properly," Catherine said suddenly. "Not really. You gave me my life that day, Nathaniel, and in doing so, you gave me everything, our marriage, our children, our home, all these years of happiness. How do you thank someone for that?" Nathaniel turned to her and took both her hands, his weathered face serious. "You thank me by living well, by being happy, by building something beautiful from what could have been tragedy. You have done that every single day, Catherine. You took a second chance at life and made it extraordinary. That is thanks enough." "We did it together," Catherine said, echoing his words from so long ago. "Everything we have, we built together." "And we are not done yet," Nathaniel said with a smile. "We have grandchildren to spoil, more years to fill with love and adventure, more sunsets to watch together. Our story is not over." He was right, of course. Samuel returned from university and opened a law practice in Silver Springs, which had grown into a proper town with paved streets and electric lights in the commercial district. He married a teacher from Santa Fe, and they gave Catherine and Nathaniel their first grandchild, a girl named Catherine Rose, in 1900. Rose took over management of the ranch, now one of the most successful horse breeding operations in the territory. She married a cowboy from Colorado who had come to buy horses and stayed for the woman. They built their own house on the ranch property, close enough to help but far enough for independence, and filled it with children who grew up in saddles. James came home from the cavalry after 5 years of service, decorated for bravery and ready to settle down. He married Martha Brennan's granddaughter, bringing their friendship full circle, and started a business supplying horses to the cavalry, working in partnership with his sister. Catherine and Nathaniel watched their children thrive, watched their grandchildren grow, and felt the satisfaction of a life well lived. They remained active and engaged, Catherine serving on various town committees and continuing her work with the library, Nathaniel training horses and mentoring young ranchers. They took walks every evening, hands clasped, talking about everything and nothing. They read to each other before bed, a habit from their early marriage that they never abandoned. They made love with the ease and depth of longtime partners who knew each other's bodies as well as their own. In 1908, New Mexico was on the cusp of statehood, and Silver Springs prepared for celebrations. Catherine and Nathaniel, now in their 50s, were honored as pioneering citizens recognized for their contributions to the town's growth and prosperity. At a ceremony in the town square, now dominated by a beautiful fountain that Catherine had helped fundraise for, the mayor spoke about their courage during the hostage crisis 30 years earlier. "These two people exemplify the best of what built the West," the mayor said. "Courage in the face of danger, compassion for their fellow citizens, and a commitment to building something lasting and good. We are honored to have them as part of our community." Catherine blushed at the praise, as she always did, but Nathaniel squeezed her hand and whispered, "It is all true. You are extraordinary." "We are extraordinary," Catherine corrected. "Always we, never just me." As they stood before the crowd, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, friends old and new, Catherine reflected on the improbable journey that had brought her here. A frightened negotiation had become a love story. A moment of crisis had become the foundation for decades of happiness. She thought about the young woman she had been, stepping forward with shaking hands to face armed outlaws, and the cowboy who had watched from the ridge. Both of them broken in their own ways, both searching for purpose and meaning. They had found it in each other, and in the process had healed wounds they did not even know how to name. They had built a life of substance and meaning, raised children who were good people, contributed to a community that thrived. It was more than Catherine had ever dared to hope for when she left Boston all those years ago. That night, lying in bed in the house they had expanded and improved over 30 years of marriage, Catherine turned to Nathaniel. "Do you have any regrets?" she asked. "Anything you wish had gone differently?" Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, considering. "I regret that I did not talk to you sooner," he said finally. "All those Saturdays we wasted being too shy. I could have had a few more weeks with you if I'd been braver." Catherine laughed softly. "I regret the same thing, but perhaps it needed to happen the way it did. Perhaps we needed that crisis to push us together, to give us the courage to reach for what we wanted." "Perhaps," Nathaniel agreed, "but I do not regret a single moment since then. Not the hard times, not the challenges, not the fears, because they were all part of our story, and I love our story, Catherine. I love every chapter of it." "So do I," Catherine whispered, moving closer to him, fitting herself against his side as naturally as breathing. "So do I." They fell asleep like that, as they had countless times before and would countless times again. Two people who had found each other in the chaos of violence and fear, who had built a love that lasted, that deepened, that became the foundation for everything good in their lives. The cowboy who had watched her courage shine, and the woman who had shown him what bravery truly meant. Partners in every sense of the word, writing their happy ending one day at a time. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges. They lost friends to age and illness, celebrated births and marriages, weathered economic difficulties and personal setbacks. Through it all, Catherine and Nathaniel remained each other's constant, each other's strength, each other's home. In 1912, when New Mexico finally achieved statehood, they celebrated with their entire extended family, now numbering over 20 people. Their ranch house had been expanded yet again to accommodate gatherings, and the Cole family reunion became an annual tradition, bringing together multiple generations to celebrate their shared history. Catherine published a book about the early days of Silver Springs, including a chapter about the hostage crisis that had changed her life. It became required reading in the local schools, and Catherine found herself giving occasional talks about frontier history. She always ended these talks by emphasizing the importance of courage, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Nathaniel was recognized by the state of New Mexico for his contributions to horse breeding, receiving an award at the state fair in Albuquerque. He stood on the stage, uncomfortable with the attention as always. And when asked what had made him successful, he simply said, "I had a good partner who believed in me. Everything else was just hard work." On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1908, their children threw them a surprise party that brought people from all over the territory. Catherine cried when she saw how many lives they had touched over the years. Former students, business partners, friends from decades past, people whose lives had intersected with theirs in meaningful ways. It was overwhelming and humbling and deeply joyful. As the evening wound down and they finally found themselves alone on the porch of their home, watching the stars emerge in the vast New Mexico sky, Catherine leaned her head on Nathaniel's shoulder. "Did you ever imagine we would end up here?" she asked. "With all of this?" "No," Nathaniel admitted. "When I was following you into that canyon 30 years ago, all I could think was that I had to keep you safe. I had no idea that keeping you safe would lead to keeping you, period. That you would become the center of my entire world." "I feel the same," Catherine said. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Nathaniel Cole. You and this life we built together. I love you more now than I even knew was possible to love someone. And I love you, Nathaniel said, turning to kiss her temple. My brave, beautiful Catherine. Thank you for walking toward those outlaws that day. Thank you for being willing to sacrifice yourself for others. Thank you for giving me the chance to be your hero, and then letting me discover that you were the hero all along. They sat in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them. Two people who had beaten the odds, who had turned a moment of crisis into a lifetime of love, who had built something lasting and good in a harsh and often unforgiving landscape. Their story had begun with negotiation and gunfire, with courage and fear, with a woman willing to die for others and a man who refused to let her. It had grown into something neither of them could have predicted, a love story as vast as the western sky, as enduring as the mountains, as precious as the first flowers of spring in the desert. They were not without scars, not without regrets, not without moments of doubt and difficulty, but they had faced everything together, and in doing so, had created something that would outlast them both. Their children would carry forward their values, their grandchildren would inherit their strength, and the town they had helped build would remember them not just as the people who had faced down outlaws and saved hostages, but as pillars of the community, as examples of what love and partnership could achieve. As they finally rose to go inside, Nathaniel took Catherine's hand and brought it to his lips, kissing her knuckles in the same courtly gesture he had used the night he proposed. "Shall we, Mrs. Cole?" he asked with a smile. "We shall, Mr. Cole," Catherine replied, smiling back, her heart as full at 50 as it had been at 24 when she had first fallen in love with this man. They walked inside together, closing the door on another day, another year, another chapter of their remarkable story, secure in the knowledge that whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced everything, together, with courage, with love, with the unshakable bond that had been forged in fire and tested by time and found to be unbreakable. Their happily ever after was not a destination but a journey, not a moment but a lifetime, not an ending but a beginning that renewed itself every single day in the choice to love, to trust, to believe in each other and the life they had built. And that was the greatest treasure of all.